I'm here today with Bill Hodgson from Power to Change. Bill, welcome and thanks for giving us the time for us to have a chat together. First of all, you might start off by just telling us who is Power to Change.
Yeah, who the heck are they? Well, a Power to Change is the more recent branding and name of a mission group that's been in Australia for 50 years. Before Power to Change, it was known as Campus Crusade for Christ and Life Ministries before that. And it had many different ministries. Universities, it was called Student Life, and we had Youth Ministries Australia, had different brands. So it got to the point we said we're going to brand it with one brand across the whole thing, and Power to Change is what we took, and we're the Australian expression of an international mission organisation called Campus Crusade for Christ.
Yeah, I think everyone would know of Campus Crusade for Christ. Interestingly, I was talking to a friend who's on the national leadership team of a denomination on the national board, and they changed their name 8 years ago. And when people ask him who he's with, and he says, and he frequently encounters a vacant stare in their face, and then he goes back to the old name, and people get it. And
they go,
I presume
yeah.
You're probably finding the same with Power to Change and Campus Crusade.
Yeah, indeed. It's kind of constant re-educating people of who we were.
Yeah. So tell us, with Campus Crusade and of course Power to Change, how did you decide to go after church planting and multiplication? Has that been a long-term feature of your ministry, or is that a newer feature?
Yeah, and the international scene, if I start there first and then bring it down to Australia, internationally, up until 2010, Campus Crusade was actually deliberately not going after church planting with the old view that, oh well, that's for the denominations in the body of Christ to do that, and we do mission. But realistically, there were churches being planted everywhere through the massive evangelism with the Jesus film, and people would come to faith, and then they'd form a follow-up group, but they never would call it a church. And eventually in about 2008, the global mission was saying, we really have to reevaluate where we're seeing success and where we need to strategically change. And they embraced to deliberately go after church multiplication as an intended outcome through partnerships with denominations, but that the intended outcome of evangelism and disciple making had to be self-sustaining, Indigenous-led, ongoing local congregations, even if it's a small group called church. So it was 2010 that whole strategy actually first was embraced.
Was it hard to change the organisation's direction? Was there resistance to changing?
Oh yeah, there really was. It not only hard to change, but it was a recognition that we don't have expertise in that area. And so it required the organizational leadership to own what we did know how to do well: evangelism, disciple making, leadership development. That we did that well. But we really then just gathered together with anyone who was doing best practice, and took the posture of learners and said, teach us what you wish we knew. Teach us what you wish we knew. And it was everything from the T for T guys to the David Watsons, everybody who has got best practice out there. Our international leadership really just sought them out, found the people that were doing it best, and then with their input, developed, okay, what's our response and how do we engage in that space? Yeah. So then there was a whole, how do you re-educate your people on the ground? Because they tended to think of evangelism and then, let someone else call on the church after that. So we had to re-educate.
Yeah, no, but that's great. And you mentioned T4T by Ying Kai and Steve Smith, and Contagious Disciple Making by David Watson.
Yeah.
Two inspirational books.
Brilliant.
And they're both very much about multiplication through disciple making. But tell me, have you found that you've had to contextualize those for the Australian context, or can you apply those principles directly?
Well, you can apply principles directly, or else they're not principles.
Yes,
how you package those principles in specific tools, specific practices and form, that needs to be contextualized. And the other thing we learned we had to contextualize for Australia was expectations of outcomes. Because in the global sense, you sort of see, here we are, Australia, post-Christian, Western, like US or the UK, and we're in my scene, we're in a global organization. And so once they said, right, church planting's the outcome, go make groups, multiply disciples, multiply. In Africa, it took off. Southeast Asia, it took off. Eastern Europe took, it's like, boom, off it goes. And in Australia, North America, Canada, the Western Europe, it's kind of like, wow, it just doesn't work like that here. There was this sense of having to adjust, that it's a different game here. One of my colleagues in the US said, I feel like where they're coming from, it's like they're playing basketball, 2 points, 2 points, 3 points. Where I'm coming from, it's like soccer. If you've had a whole game and it's a draw, that's not a bad thing.
So tell me, why is it so different? Why is it so hard, in your opinion, in other developed countries?
I think it's, I'll reflect it back into Australia, how we brought it right back here, because in 2013, we embarked on growing that strategy called Church Movements as a part of Power to Change Australia. And what we brought back in terms of our learning from overseas was that in a frontline mission context, there is pretty well everyone they talk to is a non-church person, obviously, because there's no churches there. And gospel opportunities are abundant. And every new believer has a whole network where everybody else is new to the gospel. And also there's that sense of contagion of the good news just takes off. There's also society is much more hungry for things, because they're not what we could say put to sleep by materialism and cynicism. In Australia, we found that we start with Christians, and the biggest problem to overcome to start with is that it's such a insulated bubble where most believers don't have any real active engagement with non-church friends. In fact, sometimes they're so committed and busy in church, they actually say we don't even have time to make contact with non-church friends. So the first problem we had,
Christianity.
Yeah, that's right. And it was like, oh wow, the success of some of our best practice church models actually sometimes works against helping these people have life on life connection with ordinary people out in the community. So the first problem we had to overcome was, how do we shift people's focus from invite people to come here to actually, how do we help equip you to start to live out a lifestyle of mission like Jesus out in the bubbles that the other people call theirs, the gym, the footy club, the school parents? How do we get it out there? And so that was the big challenge. We thought, we'll go after that one. And so we took some lessons from our Swiss guys in Zurich, had been working at how do they reach post-Christian, secular, young, upwardly mobile professionals. And they developed a thing called My Friends. We just love the where that sat, because it's about my friends. It starts with my friends and my family, those people I do life with in those social bubbles. And then we adapted that for Australia. And that's what we use effectively now to help mobilize ordinary believers to see the mission field in their friendship circles that they're in.
Yeah, now that's interesting. Now, mentioning again David Watson's material and the T4T material, it's all about obedience-based discipleship. Do you feel that the developed countries have had a preference to knowledge-based discipleship, which is actually making it very, very hard for existing Christians to transition into application-based or obedience-based?
Yeah, completely. There is it's so much a presupposition. It's unexamined. It's an unexamined presupposition in our thinking that knowledge equals maturity, knowledge equals progress in the Christian life, and it even becomes a pursuit that's championed.
Yes.
I'm in a deeper Bible study. I'm reading this. And that's wonderful. I've got nothing against. I'm always reading. So there's, never finished learning. Always there's more knowledge.
Lifelong
but,
learner.
Knowledge does not equate to disciple making and living as a disciple of Jesus. It's, do what I say, not just agree with what I say.
Yeah. I know I was talking to Steve Addison one day, and he said one of the problems in Australia is that most Australians are educated beyond their capacity to obey. And
agreed.
And in the next sentence, I think he was talking about Christian maturity in our country. We often look at how old someone is, or how long they've been a Christian, or how much of the Bible they know. All good things, but really, truly Christian maturity is how well we represent Jesus on this earth by applying his teaching in his life.
Yeah. We got a tool that we do. One of our processes we do with churches and church leadership in Australia is, we call it Shift M to M, small m, number 2, big M. And it's about helping leaders make a shift in thinking from more and better ministry, as good as that is, to actually thinking, well, how do we do ministry in a way that disciple making movements is the outcome, not just more ministry. And so we take them into the life of Jesus as a model, and we look at how Jesus' movement developed over time, and it's quite a learning experience, very eye-opening, and helps that paradigm change in their thinking. But what the first thing that they recognize is that when they do the diagnostics on their own congregation, their own ministry, they find that the bulk of their people, the vast majority of all the people they have involvement with, are at the what we call the build level of their process. They're believers. They're involved in church programs. They're devout. They're sincere. There's no doubting that. But their energies are all put into maintaining and supporting these programs, or growing deeper in the Bible, or character development. They're not actively equipped in how to reach out to their friends. They're not living a fishing for men lifestyle. And so the big challenge then is how do we help identify those who are ready and cast the vision, and challenge them to be equipped to make connection to their non-church friends in a deliberate way, and to be able to help their non-church friends come to know Jesus. The difference we've added to that in the recent years, thinking church planting rather than just mission and evangelism, is we want to see an outcome that, how do we help ordinary believers form a group around the word, a discovery Bible group, so that group does the journey together.
You would have heard it said that we need to lower the bar on what it means to be church and raise the bar on what it means to be a disciple.
In fact, I've heard you say that, Tim.
Probably, but I've heard other people say that. So it's not new. It's not something from me. I'm just re-quoting other people. What would you say would be the radical minimums that we actually need for a church? How, for a church to be a legitimate church, what's the minimum standard? How would you describe that?
Yeah, well, because I know no one's going to hear this, I'll go out there and they can attack me later. Just kidding. We actually had to answer that question within our global mission, because across cultures and everything else. And so it was a really interesting question. I think there's two answers. I would say for me, there's a simple biblical answer. Book of Acts, first century church. What was it? Well, it was a family, a household, maybe 2 or 3 families that gathered together, saved with some unsaved involved, no doubt as well. And they gathered together as family to the apostles' teaching, whatever they had in their hands, to encourage each other in the spirit for prayer, worship, and they also were focused on moving out into mission. They were disciples who were committed to gather as disciples, make a difference in their community through the love of God, and to make disciples. So for me, it's love God, love people, make disciples who do the same, and look for kingdom transformation in the community. And so we had to get a little more specific than that, because we as a mission internationally are counting how many churches are planted. So the real question is, well, when is it a church?
Yeah.
When do we count it? So we count groups that are formed.
Yep.
But then our definition we adopted, and this is just organizationally, we had to come up with a clear one. It was 10 or more baptized believers from more than 3 families. So some of the third world places said, well, you got to have more than one family, otherwise you could have more than that in the one family. With recognized local leadership, so it's not leadership from outside. There's someone in that group is the elder.
Yeah.
That meet together around the word, practice worship. They're making a difference. They have a plan to make a difference in their community, and they're involved in making disciples. And it's kind of as simple as that. There's one or two other things in there that I can't recall, but that's the basis of it.
Yeah, no, that's great, Bill. As a matter of interest, I listened to an Exponential USA session with Brian Sanders about microchurches earlier today, and we've just put that on the Exponential Australia website. It's a brilliant interview with Brian Sanders, and his description as to what were the minimums through a church basically covered the same ground as yourself. Which is not a surprise, because it's all taken out of the book of Acts in the New Testament. But
yeah, we had to wrestle with this, and here's what I do with it too, because we found, like, again, in our organization, International Mission, sitting around these conference tables and talking about what this was, people from cultures which have established Christian churches and established Christian heritage, Western Europe, North America, Australia, and places like that. And often our leaders were pastorally trained, ordained.
Yeah.
They really struggled with what you do and don't call a church. It became almost a not a side question. It's a major question biblically what it is. My question was, when you're working with, say, a pastor of a local church, what I don't want to do is get bogged down in defining, is this small group that's grown amongst the young adults in his congregation, is it a church or isn't a church? I don't actually care in that case. That's right. Let's just help it multiply, and let's see 20 of these things, right?
That's it.
We'll work it out later, because it's already under the umbrella of a local church.
Yes.
And so the church in Ephesus was multiple congregations. But it was, so I think when we have the umbrella of the church, such and such Baptist church, I like to be able to put the leader at rest by saying, call these missional groups, call them, what do you want to call them? But make sure that they are self-contained in the sense of the mission that they take out. They're complete in the Great Commission and the task of mission, even though they're under the wider umbrella of this broader community called such and such church. Yeah. But let's not get bogged down on whether they are or aren't.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, Bill, what have been some of the keys that you've learned through this whole journey?
Wow. Still learning, and there's so many. Just a couple I'd say off the top of my head is that there's one, how do I say it? Not so much a difficulty. There's steps in engaging churches and pastors. Firstly, it's in the conversation around church planting and the need. So once the need is acknowledged, then there has to be a change in thinking for the leaders who are in charge, who are making leadership decisions. And that requires a paradigm shift that's anchored biblically, not sociologically. And that's, for us, we just keep going back to the life and the ministry of Jesus. and the model that he gave of the Great Commission. So it's got to be anchored biblically. Secondly, once there's a change in thinking amongst leaders, and even when church pastors and leaders say, yes, we want to go that way, change management and delivering on it is a very, very difficult thing. So it's not a simple thing then, oh, the person now wants to move to disciple making and church multiplication, it's going to happen. No, not necessarily. It's complex to see change in an existing structure. So we then say, focus on where you have the opportunity. Don't try and change everything, but look for the new shoots that you can. Is it those young adults? Is it that Sudanese community that you're reaching out to? Is it the young mums play group? Where is there opportunity in a social affinity group that you can launch the new? Because typical thinking in so many churches is that once the change in thinking happens in leadership, they try to take everybody there all at once. And that does not work well. Yes. And the third thing I'd see is then we have to get it from the big picture. We want to launch churches or multiply churches, etc., to actually the micro skills of how does the ordinary believers learn how to become disciple makers amongst the people they already have connection with. So that's very simple skills of personal, missional living, engaging with people deliberately. We call intentional living, sharing the life of Jesus that they're experiencing, praying with people, looking for the touch of God in someone's life, helping them come to know the gospel, and how to get them involved around the word. So if it doesn't have both the change in thinking, but then very, very practical skills for ordinary believers in that congregation to have a change in doing and living, then it doesn't get there. It's a good idea that never sees its day.
No, that's fantastic. I really appreciate your insights, Bill. One last question for you. How can people around our country come to work with you at Power to Change with the goal of multiplying churches or groups in Australia? How do you work with groups like denominations and ministries?
Yeah. So we work with church leadership, and we have many partners, organizations that we are partnering with who use co-use each other's materials and resources. We have three main strategies that we work with. With church leaders, we have, as I said, the Shift M2M leadership journey, which helps leaders and pastors go through that paradigm shift through a lovely, deep and slow, we call it a slow walk through the life of Christ. And we do that in a chronological way to see how did Jesus' movement develop over time. And we look at the key principles. We also then, for those leaders that want to help mobilize their people, or for ordinary believers that say, I want to learn how to live missionally. How do I make disciples who make disciples and multiply? Then we have a simple process that we call My Friends. It helps people, we say, live like Jesus. And both of those learning communities, or those strategies that we use, can be accessed online through powertochange.org.au, and you /church movements or shift, and it'll pop, and you can find that information there. I'd love to talk with people who may have an interest in either of those things. Our multiplication bit, we've learned not so much to lead with that. A funny story, when we first thought we were going to launch multiplying groups, and we found that it was either other people are already engaged, or people, it was just too far out there. So we thought, let's help ordinary believers discover they can even form a group, and then let's talk to them about how you can multiply it. So those that form groups, we have a thing called Generations that help them learn how to multiply those groups and see where that goes. So that'd be where people can engage with us, and we just love to go on the journey with you.
That's fantastic. I know through A2A we have, which is the movement that I lead, we have a young church planter couple who are planting at the moment, and they've very much appreciated your help. They've spoken extremely highly of yourself, but also the process.
Oh yeah, they're guns. Yeah.
They're tremendous, aren't they?
I tell you, they are a credit to your movement. They're a credit to your movement. They are they're gems, and they're out there doing the church plant where you start with nobody and you just plant a seed of the gospel and see how God brings people together. And that's a beautiful way to see it happen.
Yeah, it is. Actually, one last question for you, Bill. In a situation like that, where they've gone out and have people meeting in their home, they haven't gone public yet, they've baptized a few people, would you call that a church plant at that stage, or is that a pre-plant?
A pre-plant.
Yeah.
What is a plant that's a pre-plant? I guess that's a
the
seed.
Conversation
Yeah.
I was just having with
I
some
know
people
that
yesterday.
is the conversation.
Because at what time, at what stage does a church plant actually become a church plant?
Yeah, and I think, I think everybody within their own ecosystem has to come up with their definition of that, and then you use your language consistent with your definitions. For me, I see that's a church planting process.
Yes.
If I plant something, it's planted. Whether it survives is another question. It's not a plant because it survives. That's after the plant. So when I plant something, so I'd say that's a church plant. It's in its very initial stages.
Yes.
It's not yet viable. It's not yet reproduced, but is it a plant? There is something going on there, and that's happening. And so for me, but other denominations would, the trouble is if you call that a plant, then you're going to have a higher attrition rate of your plants than if you wait and then you call it a plant later on, So,
that's right.
But for me, I think it's people come up with their terms, define their terms, and then stick with their terms.
Yeah, and hey, what do we have to do with plants? We have to water them, and
and nurture them. Yeah, and we all know that there's a high attrition rate, and that's not a reason not to do it. That's a reason to do more. Plant more, plant more, plant more. Multiply quicker. Don't take longer. Yeah,
no, that's fantastic. Bill, I really appreciate the time that you've given today, but also your wisdom and insights. And it's great having you as part of the patchwork quilt, if you like, of church planting and disciple making and multiplication across this country, because we need all different types and all different flavors, but you're doing a tremendous job.
Absolutely, man. I think we need more of every kind, whatever the form of church someone's doing. I say, may God bless you and multiply it. Let's just get more of every kind out there, because the need is so great, and we need churches multiplied to reach every person. We'd love to see the global goal that has been out there for decades, and we late adopted it, is that one church or group for every 1,000 people of the population. Every social network, every high-rise, every village, every neighborhood. And that is going to take absolutely everybody working in partnership to see that happen.
Yeah, so that'd be 25,000 churches around Australia.
Yeah, and I think McCrindle or someone would say there's about 13 to 15,000, but that's congregations. That wouldn't include missional groups.
NCLS would say that there's, the last time they counted, which is 2016, they believe that their best estimate is 10,150 odd. So 10,000.
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting. That's great.
So we've only got 15,000 to go then.
Okay, and then after lunch, that's enough, I think. Bill, again, thanks very much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Tim, thank you so much for the privilege, and I really am excited about Exponential.